not a monster.
We are talking How to Make a Werewolf. That's a 2024 movie directed by Omar Reed and Steph Henderson. Omar Reed also wrote the movie and has a small role in the film as well. So this is a kind of supernatural drama horror movie set in Atlanta in the States. And it focuses on a kind of pre-established world where there is a variety of supernatural beings that are kind of working and living somewhat in the shadows, away from the kind of the human sort of eye, so to speak, although there are some humans who are aware of it. So effectively, it primarily focuses on a coven of witches, and in this movie, the witches it's not like a skill that anyone can kind of just learn. It seems to be a kind of genetic disposition, so witches are kind of predisposed to be born to be witches and things like that. So you have families of witches who are kind of genetically enabled to use magic and things like this. So they're a kind of creature class themselves, rather than sort of being like a skill that one can learn and become a witch, so to speak. And there's a variety of kind of hierarchies and kind of power struggles within this kind of coven of witches. We also have a clan of vampires, and within them they are kind of, there's pure bloods and I guess non-pure bloods, and so they have a kind of truce with the witches. You also have dampires, which are effectively half vampires, who kind of are aligned with the witches, so to speak. And then we have this kind of sort of council of humans, I think, who are sort of somewhat in tune with the mystical world. And there's this kind of big truce, effectively, with all these kind of supernaturals kind of living side by side, although albeit not really in harmony exactly. But one of the witches it goes a bit rogue, and she's kind of practicing dark magic and stuff like that, and she ultimately wants to cause trouble. And she takes advantage of this guy who is wanting revenge for the death of his sister. And she kind of convinces him to go through this procedure, I guess, that will give him, air quotes, strength, but in actual fact turns him into a kind of werewolf. And in this kind of universe, I guess, werewolves are kind of almost like more like a possessed. They're like a kind of possessed by a sort of a demon sort of thing. But ultimately, so you have like a kind of Venom style sort of second voice in your head and stuff. But it still acts, he comes out in the full moon, it's all, bestial and everything. But this werewolf seems to be more powerful than anyone could have realised, and effectively starts killing everyone. So what will happen, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. Now, I should point out that this movie is a very low budget film. So, expectations in check. What can this movie do with the budget ultimately that it kind of has? So, interestingly, I found this movie to play more like a kind of soap opera with horror elements. I suppose you could compare it to the likes of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, kind of that sort of level of kind of horror. So it's somewhat of a light horror in regards to, and there is plenty of deaths in it, but it has that kind of lighter tone, and there's a lot about the interpersonal relationships between the characters. So if you're a fan of the likes of Buffy, Charmed, Vampire Diaries, I guess, things like that, this is kind of in that vein. Now, one of the advantages is you do get a lot of the soap opera elements that kind of give you maybe characters that are quite well defined. Now, there's a reason for this. There's a very long runtime, this movie, and it's a double-edged sword. But one of the upshots is that you get quite a good flavour of the characters. And I have to say, I think the characters, for the most part, are all quite likeable. And they're quite well defined. So I found the kind of the characters to be quite well realised and well written. And even, I think the acting is a little amateurish at times, but even with that being said, I kind of think it works for this movie, because I just feel that the characters are kind of emboldened because of it to a certain degree. It's hard to describe, really. But yeah, so I actually kind of quite liked our characters. They all seem quite likeable. They all seem quite well defined in their kind of roles. I kind of quite like the relationship that all these sort of different species have with one another, and even within their own kind of sect and stuff, there's relationships that are kind of going on, and we see a lot of these characters and witches, for example, having their private life, and they kind of just more or less live like humans, and that was kind of, again, it was kind of interesting. So I kind of like the world as well. So I kind of like the characters. I kind of like the world that this movie depicts, and it's not as if it starts from the beginning. It's a fully realised world that's already existed that you are kind of going into. But I feel it does the work in kind of explaining the status quo, so you're not kind of lost. So I think this movie looks like it's had a lot of like pre-thought to it, and it's been mapped out about where it kind of wants to go, and you know, it is obviously somewhat of a sort of a passion project, and has been meticulously you know, planned, really, and it shows, I would say, and you know, you get interested in the characters because it does the work. The actual kind of horror elements themselves, as I say, they're not particularly gratuitous, I would suggest. I kind of liked our werewolf, I have to say. I thought it was a good take on it. Now, werewolves are obviously more of a VFX heavy creature than vampires or witches. And the werewolf makeup and costume is maybe not as grandiose as some you've seen, you know, Bad Moon, American Werewolf in London, The Howling. We don't have that. But I think they use the budget wisely to still make a kind of fairly cool looking werewolf who's kind of unique. He has like enlarged hands and like feet, and a kind of obviously like a bestial face, but he almost like a minotaur. He's like the rest of his body is more kind of just human. But I kind of think it works. I think it still gets the kind of the look across, and it seems kind of functional and stuff like that. And the fact that you have like a second entity within this sort of guy's head driving him, like a kind of demonic entity. Again, it's a little bit of a different spin, but without completely kind of changing the lore. You know, it still has a full moon. It still has a problem with silver, things like that. So I have to say I found this movie quite interesting, and yeah, the effects are cheap, but I still think it kind of just about works, I would say, when you consider this is a low budget movie and you can't really have this level, you know, high levels of VFX. And because I watch a lot of low budget stuff here, the lack of VFX, or the cheaper style of VFX, maybe doesn't worry me as much as it would worry other people, so I kind of will say that. The story itself is pretty interesting, and it kind of does feel like this is maybe part of a series of films, but nonetheless it does have interesting elements to the story, and I was intrigued to see where the characters would end up. So let's talk about what doesn't work. Okay, so I think you have to go into this movie knowing that it's kind of a part one. At least that's how it seems to me. Because it definitely, when the movie ends, it feels like there's a lot more to say on this one. I have to say, the biggest critique for here, as a film, it's too long. It's 2.25 hours long. That's a long movie. And it doesn't kind of feel like it's ending. It feels like this is like another film. It feels more like 3 episodes of a TV show kind of put together. So I wonder if this would have been better as a TV show. And it plays like a TV show because, possibly down to the budget, but because this movie is somewhat like a soap opera, we spend a lot of time with the interpersonal relationships of all the different characters, and so it kind of plays like that. It plays more like a TV drama. Now, when you have that, you're having normally having 45-minute episodes interspersed, and then you watch it like that. But when you condense it into one movie, it feels a little elongated, shall we say. So to have this as a punchier movie, I would be cutting half an hour out of this. Now, I do feel there's elements here that are somewhat superfluous to the plot and could be, cut down. Yeah, it makes for this, and I mentioned a double-edged sword. The characters are kind of quite well defined because we spend a lot of time with them. The other side of that is the runtime, I feel, is quite long, and as such, the movie's pacing can sometimes feel somewhat, flabby, if that makes sense. It feels like it's spinning its wheels, and there's sequences and maybe storylines that didn't really need to be there or could have been trimmed down to make it a more punchier film. It's obviously a decision made by the filmmakers here, and I understand when you're an independent filmmaker, you are reluctant to kind of cut down the work that you've done. But this is why ultimately a producer should say to be more commercial, it needs to have to be a bit more palatable for general audiences and things. So that I would say is the main critique here, is that it's the length of it, I feel, makes the film a little kind of I was engaged in the story, so I wouldn't say it was dull, but it feels overstretched. So to discuss the other things, obviously we've got to look at the budget of the film. This is a lower budget movie, and as such, there are things here that are reminiscent of a low budget movie. When we see like the VFX, computer effects, they kind of look like drag and drop, from effects packages and things like this. The kind of fake blood looks fake. Some of the kind of just the general presentation, again, it looks a little low budget. So the acting, as I say, I genuinely think the acting probably works, but if we're being honest, there are some performances here that seem a little bit unconfident, shall we say, and maybe lack a little bit of dramatic edge. I kind of think it kind of works to a certain degree, but it would be, I'd be remiss for not mentioning it. That's not everyone, it's just that there are a couple of elements here that I feel not quite as good as it could have been. So I ultimately think this movie is quite a watchable idea. I think the strength is it's such a well realised world for the low budget, and the characters are quite strong, but it's just let down by, I think, a little bit of overzealous runtime, which affects the pacing, which kind of ultimately means the movie is a little action light, a little bit horror light, and I think it could have been, to be a bit more impactful, could have been re-edited and to make moments of danger a little bit more closer together. And as much as the soap opera elements, I think, give the characters some agency and some and we buy into them because of that, it does affect the pacing of the story. So overall, I've got to say I think the idea here is very solid, and it's built on solid foundations. The execution of it, I would be a little bit harder with, if it were me. But it's watchable and enjoyable characters, and if you can get over a low budget, I think it's certainly an enjoyable movie past that. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I kind of liked it, if I have to say, but it isn't without any problems. So would you see it based on what I've told you? Have you seen it? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.